Welcome to our third session, Designing and Scaling Responsible AI, where Triveni Gandhi, Chris Van Pelt, George Matthew, Chloe Bacalar, and Dottie Schindlinger will discuss the art, science, and thought behind crafting responsible and ethical AI systems.
All right, welcome everyone. So I thought we'd cover a somewhat mundane topic, responsible AI today. Hope everyone's ready for the ride. Let's start with the big stuff. When we think about responsible AI, let's set the stage for the audience here. What are the things that we think about today that kind of matter when we're kind of building responsible AI as folks that are building software in this space? How does this really impact us on a day-in, day-out basis? How does this impact humanity? The small questions. Chris, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, we've shifted into this new world where now we have these systems that are somewhat non-deterministic, that can potentially put out things that are toxic or harmful or untrue. So we need new systems, new tools to try to prevent that from impacting the users of these systems.
Yeah, I think if you scale out and look at how we can try and define responsible AI, you see that there's a lot of frameworks out there. NIST, EU, Singapore has the AI Verify, and they have all these big principles. So we at Dataiku at least try to consolidate those into a baseline, bare minimum, what constitutes responsible AI: reliable, accountable, fair, and transparent. RAFT, which I know is also a computer programming thing, but it's not the same thing in this case. So we try to think about those big principles first to then guide what we're going to do practically.
And we need leadership that understands this. One of the things that we've been doing is helping boards of directors and senior leaders of organizations really ratchet up their level of understanding around trustworthy AI and just AI in general. Because they're going to be the ones making decisions around where to invest, how to innovate in this space. And if they don't really understand those incentives or those innovations, it's going to be difficult for them to make the right decisions. So that's the other sort of piece of the puzzle.
So we're going to dig into the leadership piece in a moment and how to think about this. But even before we go there, there's this constant concern, this anxiety that's in the market today that we can't necessarily get to an aligned set of AI systems, like the alignment problem itself. Does anyone want to just kick it off and just talk through what do we think about as far as what is that alignment problem and is it getting better?
Yeah, well, the alignment problem is twofold. You have a socio-technical, it's a socio-technical problem, right? On the social side, it goes back to those frameworks that I was discussing. And then you have people who are saying, well, I know there's already 10 frameworks out there, but I got to give you my own too, right? And so that alignment. And then from a technical piece, actually aligning all of the different systems, softwares, peoples out there. And I think what we're seeing now with this move towards, especially with generative AI, being able to watermark or stamp that this image was made with AI, that's the kind of alignment that I think should be coming into play at a much bigger level.
When I think about alignment, I think the moment ChatGPT was released in December, that's where a model was really well aligned and really useful. Before ChatGPT, there was GPT-2, GPT-3. These were really interesting, but they weren't that aligned. The difference was they really fine-tuned ChatGPT to make it stay kind and helpful. Which, I think changed the world.
A co-pilot for humanity, if you will.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, to be fair, it took them a little time to make it
helpful.
A while.
Didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
The first release of ChatGPT was not kind or helpful in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, even when you think about where ChatGPT and the 3.5 model came out, I mean, it had some serious hallucination challenges.
Hallucinations, bias, toxicity, all of that.
So let's talk a little bit about that. When we think about some of those challenges from a hallucination standpoint, where did those shifts occur? Even as you called out, 3.5 was not aligned, and then suddenly 4 was aligned a few months later. So how do you think that played out, and why?
I mean, I think it was a lot of researchers, people in the space of responsible AI, and then the average non-expert AI person who had access now to this tool goes in, uses it, and says, wait, this is weird, this isn't right. And I think it was that human feedback, which I know we'll talk about a little bit, but the sort of human feedback of, hey, there's some real big issues here, and being able to not implicitly entrust a model and say, look, I understand that this is still a tool and I need to first interrogate it so that I can give better feedback to its designers so they can then improve on it. And I think it's a much more like social, technical kind of drive to make this a more useful product.
So these human feedback loops are going to be quite important, right? So we talked a little bit about this idea that reinforcement learning through human feedback improves the models over time. It's not just that initial training run. It's not just about how to get it into the wild, but it's also about the feedback loops that improve the models themselves. If we think that through a little bit more, does the course of who is providing feedback have to also matter? Do we have to have more diverse folks providing feedback? Like how do we think about the diversity and inclusion of the feedback loops to improve our models, particularly from an alignment standpoint?
Yeah. I mean, I've been talking
That's
with Chris, but
okay.
yes. I mean, I don't know, like, should we be more diverse in our feedback? Yes. Like, and that's not like, me is not gonna come up here and say no. But I think that there's a diversity too of not just like the people within an organization, let's say the business experts or the data scientists or the governance team, but there's also your consumers, your users. They also need to be a diverse set of folks. And then beyond that, we also need to think, for a broader population of like, I think there's a lot of harms too coming out from people who have to go and be annotators for very horrific images, or there's questions around inclusivity and differently abled people. So there's a really wide set of people and experiences to draw upon, and if we don't, we're actually doing a disservice to ourselves to not draw on that.
Dottie, you were setting up this idea of how we should think about just training and education, and it's an incredible piece of work that you've been doing, particularly with Diligent. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about just how the process has gone in terms of just getting executive leadership, boards, policymakers really up to speed on the nuances of how things have been moving pretty fast. How are they keeping up? How are they even knowing what matters here?
Yeah, it's a concern. When you think about the work of boards of directors, for example, even the term that's used for what happens in the boardroom is to deliberate, which has an alternate meaning, and that's slow. Deliberate also means slow. And it's a concern because we know that boards are not really the most technical folks. In fact, we just did a report just a couple weeks ago in concert with a firm to look at the level of technology savvy of the S&P 500, which the largest firms that there are. And among the S&P 500, only 31% of board members of the S&P 500 have any professional expertise in any kind of technology. So it's a real concern, right? These are individuals who don't come to this space with any professional background in any kind of technology, let alone AI. And yet they are going to be making the decisions around this space. So, the thing about this new technology, well, I should say generative AI and specifically ChatGPT and everything that's been happening over the last year, it is going to far outpace what boards are able to keep up with. It is going to far outpace what regulation is going to be able to keep up with. And so it creates this onus on companies to move at a different speed. And in particular, I think we're in this interesting time where you now see people are rating their level of trust in companies higher than their level of trust in government. And that's an interesting phenomenon. And there's lots of reasons for that. But that puts a lot of onus on boards and CEOs and other C-suite leaders to really think differently about their level of responsibility around things like ensuring trustworthy AI tools, ensuring responsible AI. And that requires them to know a lot more. They don't know a lot right now. I think I can say that pretty emphatically. So one of the things we've been trying to do is provide some training and education around AI ethics. Let's start there. You don't need to become a data scientist or a computer scientist to understand how to apply ethical frameworks to some of the big questions, to understand that your organization needs to have AI principles in place, and to ask the question, what are our principles around our AI development? What is our AI development? What is our strategy? Those are things that every board should be asking. Right now, I don't think that's really happening as broadly as it should.
And how are boards reacting to this? I mean, if you think about it, initially, if you have not been engaged in these topics, it might feel like a bit of a deer in headlights as a board member. How do you get them through that process of just coming to an understanding of what's here and now, as well as just like being a capable decision maker?
Well, that's actually sort of the bright spot in this story. They're hungry. They're hungry for this information. We do a survey every year with corporate board member called What Directors Think. And every year, one of the things we ask is, what are the top 5 issues on next year's board agenda? For next year, by far and away, generative AI is at the top of their agendas. They are very concerned about it. They're interested in it. They see this as a huge growth opportunity, but they don't really know what it is. They don't really know what to do with it, but they know they need to talk about it. They know they need to know a lot more about it. So I see that as a positive sign. They also, however, are asked, what do you see as the hardest areas for you to oversee in your governance role? Again, generative AI tops that list. So they both see that it's an opportunity and it's a challenge. And so again, I think they're hungry to get that education. They're looking for ways to get smarter about this. They're looking to bring in experts. They're looking to get better educated just so they can have good conversations around the board table.
One of the things that clearly comes up day in, day out when it comes to just coming up to speed as a board, specifically when it comes to AI and AI systems, is regulations. When you go into a conversation with board members that are coming up to speed, when you're having, more broadly in this team here, just conversations on where AI regs are headed, just how do you sort of start the topic? How do you get up to speed? How do we think about regulations as a sort of fast-moving topic in the space of AI? Just how do we even get started here?
Yeah, I mean, well, thankfully, there's a lot happening in the regulatory space right now. I think probably the most useful set of frameworks to take a look at is the EU AI Act, which is being hotly discussed, likely to be passed before the end of the year, is likely to be then implemented by 37 member nations that have been part and parcel of putting the law together. It's not going to be super quick to be implemented because, of course, once it gets passed, there's then going to be a number of years before each country figures out how to actually implement it within their jurisdiction. But it does provide a really useful framework. The first big sweeping piece of AI legislation that has been passed is in China. That went into effect in August. It's incredibly restrictive. And so that's causing a lot of concern in terms of what that, the sort of the downstream effect of that law. If you haven't spent some time reading it, I would definitely take a look at that. There's a great website called China Briefing, which will give you sort of a good English language translation and sort of share with you some of the pieces there. Here in the US, it's a much more complex picture, isn't it always in the US? We have legislation happening at every level, federal, state, local. There's a lot happening in California. There's different federal agencies, including the FTC, the SEC, the Biden administration, all looking at different ways to provide regulation around AI. And that's because everyone is realizing we need to do something. We need to really figure out, how do we make sure that 5 years from now we don't look back and say, why didn't we? Right? That's the big concern. Everyone really wants to not have a repeat of some of the sins that we've committed in the past with other technologies that have come out.
Yeah, to add to that, I think there's 2 notable things about these regulations. One, for the EU AI Act, I mean, it's like the leader of the pack in some ways, but the EU AI Act talks a lot about what obligations you have as a model provider versus a user of a third-party AI system. And so it's important for organizations as they're scaling to understand where they fit in that value chain, or sort of the AI ethics value chain. And then the second piece of this is that right now everyone's talking about regulations and is all excited about it because of ChatGPT. But there's a lot more non-generative AI that also needs regulation, and the EU AI Act was originally working towards. So let's not get lost in the Gen AI space and forget about the fact that, yeah, even a classification model, if it's predicting someone's ability to pay a loan, should probably be regulated in some way. Right.
Chris, when we think about the use of MLOps, the use of LLMOps, how AI governance systems are starting to come into market as we speak. Is this going to help? Is this going to hurt? How does this all fit into the construct of both regulation and just responsible AI?
Yeah, I think it'll be good for ML tool, ML ops companies, because any regulation is going to require all of these activities are tracked in some consistent manner. So all of these models, they're consuming some input data set, training for some amount of time, predicting things against that data set, and then producing a model. So tracking exactly what data set was used, what model was produced, then how we maybe evaluate that model or have humans evaluate it. You need a central system that can really keep track of that entire lineage, which is exactly what weights and biases does. The other piece is just looking at the data in a way that the teams can collaborate and discuss nuances and issues that are coming up. So being able to log just a table of maybe images if you're doing computer vision tasks, or a table of text if you're doing LLM work, and flagging examples that are potentially hallucinating or problematic, so that then you can go back, refine your training set, and kind of repeat this cycle. And this will happen, forever, essentially. So these are all things that I think are very good for ML tools companies, because there's just like such a demand to have that visibility.
And Chris, when weights and biases really got going, it was predominantly focused on MLOps, even before there was this sort of wave around LLMs and transformers. So just for everyone in the audience, just like give a little bit of a overview of like what's different now, and how do you think about that at weights and biases in terms of providing solutions into the market when there is this sort of new wave of, as it was called out, models that are much more predictive in nature and probabilistic in nature than deterministic in how a generative model works today, and what are things that we have to do differently from a tools and just delivery standpoint?
Yeah. So when we started weights and biases, we saw that deep learning was really taking off, and at the time it was computer vision and self-driving autonomy. We fast forward to today with large language models. Under the hood, it's the same stuff. It's a much bigger deep learning model that's powering these LLMs and these chat interfaces. But another big thing that's changed is when we started, the people working on machine learning or really working closely with machine learning as developers were ML researchers, people that went to school, studied this topic, understood the fact that these models are predicting with some amount of probability, and they're going to be wrong by definition some amount of the time. And today we have regular software developers now able to just hook into any API out there to build these really powerful systems. But the danger there is they don't understand that, you need to think about the fact that even if you make the same query to GPT-4, the exact same query, by definition, you're going to get a different response if you do that same query another time because of things like temperature. So having a rigorous evaluation process, a way to really understand how these models are performing and how changes to your prompts or different parts of your pipeline are affecting the end output is really crucial. Another piece is, being able to monitor these APIs. So a set of functionality we just released is around large language model monitoring, where within an organization, you can tell your engineers, hey, go see if you can create something really interesting here with this stuff. And by configuring the weights and biases LLM monitoring proxy, all of that information can be stored in a central dashboard, so you can see what people are doing and what responses are coming out to do further analysis or ensure you have that higher level of governance, which we're seeing companies really, really need.
Perfect. And that actually is a great transition, Triveni, to talk a little bit about end-to-end AI governance. When we think about what it takes to build AI governance systems today, tell us a little bit about how you guys think about this from an organizational standpoint, like the ethos of an organization that's required to bring in an AI system at scale, and what's the governance surrounding that?
Yeah, so with a lot of our clients, the ones that are most successful right now at both scaling and scaling responsibly are the ones who are willing to bring all of the different parts of the organization into the room. And so actually, I feel like our panel is a really great example of this, right? Like if you're the business user and you're the governance expert and you're our MLOps, DevOps person, and I'm technically a data scientist by training, but I don't consider myself a very good one. But as a data scientist, we all have our specific roles. And I think to Chris's point of, the software developer knows that, I can go into ChatGPT, but when it changes an answer, what does it mean for the answer to be different, right? If the answer is different, is that good or bad? What is good or bad in this case? What is good or bad to the goals of my organization and the ethos of my organization? And that has to be set up front by someone else or a set of folks. And so it becomes a much larger consideration to actually bring all those people into the room together and level set, so that then when someone like Chris goes in and says, hey, I checked out the API endpoints and they're looking good, even though Dottie might not know what that means. I'm sure you do, you're a very educated person, but someone like Dottie might not know what that means. It doesn't matter because there's a common framework that we're all referring back to. Yeah.
And to that point, I would say, from the perspective of the leaders of the organization, thinking really thoughtfully about how we incentivize things. What are we incentivizing? Is it growth at any cost? Really kind of thinking that through very carefully, because that I think is where we lead to bad outcomes. Yeah. Really being very clear about what are our core values, what is sort of where are the bumpers, so we make sure that we stay on the straight and narrow path. I think that's incredibly important, and of course that requires you to ask good questions and keep asking good questions, and not just set things and then forget it.
Yep.
It's not a set and forget. I mean, with AI, it is a ask and ask again and ask again, and continually be involved in that process and remain engaged.
Yeah.
There's a piece of AI work that's happening right now known as constitutional AI, since you mentioned this notion of like, can you set it and forget it? Can you put guardrails? Is it a static moment in time here where you can literally build an AI system that just does what it needs to do and it just goes? Or how do we think about this from an iteration, evolution standpoint?
Yeah. So I think going back to, what I see with my clients who are using our tool for this end-to-end governance is that they're actually, they aren't doing this set and forget, right? They are setting up regular check-ins, regular re-monitoring, regular reconfirmation. And I actually think the next step of that is to say, what are the impacts of what we've built and put out into the market on our clients, on the world around us, and then use that to re-inform the next set of development. I think too often we sort of forget that last bit of what's the value that I've gotten out of this project that we spent 6 months to build and deploy. And not just the ROI value, but also what's the impact on everybody else. And so, I mean, I'm never going to be an advocate for set and forget, unless it's like a slow cooker, right? But for AI, absolutely.
For your AI system.
Yeah, my AI systems do not set and forget. And anyone who says, push here to be responsible is absolutely lying to you. Like, it is a human-led, iterative process. And I think that moving forward, 10 years ago, no one knew that the job title responsible AI lead would exist, right? And so I think moving forward, impact evaluators and, reinforcement learning of our actual systems and like giving feedback on what's actually happening is going to be a new wave of work.
Yeah, I'm going to give a hot take here, by the way.
Yeah.
There's likely going to be a greater importance on responsible AI systems folks than there are prompt engineers.
100%. And I say that fully trying to set up my own career path.
And that career path, just last question around the governance piece. As a data scientist who's been professionally building systems for a while, how do you think about your experiences as a data scientist, and what would you convey to people who weren't data scientists in terms of like what they could learn from what data science has taught us, particularly in this last decade?
Yeah, I think data scientists are very wary of anything that looks too good to be true, right? When you run a model and you get 99% accuracy, it's an immediate red flag, right? Like, no, that's not possible. My model should not be this good. And I think that business users, end users, the average person in the world should probably take that same level of skepticism with AI. And if they did, we might be in a little bit better place around, especially the disinformation world, the ways that we just believe anything we see on the internet. So that sort of like critical thinking, I think, is a big part of what data scientists can teach. But on the other side, data scientists, for our part, need to learn about people and society and social science stuff. I have a background in social science, so for me this is a no-brainer, but a lot of the other data scientists I work with are like, well, this isn't a biased model because we didn't include gender in it. And like, no, there's plenty of other reasons why this model could be biased, so.
Okay, we're gonna go into the lightning round. First round of questions. What is the one thing about AI systems that excites you and worries you for this next decade, Chris?
The thing that excites me is like Copilot, helping me program. I use it every day as a developer. It's so exciting. The thing that scares me is I saw how much improvement we had from like GPT-2 to 3 to 4. There's no indication that's going to stop. It seems tied to like Moore's law. So hold on, it's going to get interesting.
Wow, what excites me about AI? I think actually there's a lot of interesting developments in like trying to interrogate these models and make sense of them at a much more core level. At the same time, that also worries me because I think that, to your point, things are going very fast and we're not taking enough time to first like slow down and understand how did we even get to this position or to this point.
The risk of being overly repetitive. I think what I've seen with generative AI has been very exciting. The thought that really anyone can be an innovator, anyone can program in plain English is a very exciting idea, but that also is very frightening because the pace of that and the possibility of abuse, of intentional misuse is very high, and I don't think that we're going to necessarily be able to rein it in as quickly as we are able to innovate in it, and that scares me a bit.
Okay, so last question for the lightning round. I'm going to introduce, hopefully everyone knows what this means, a PDOOM, right? So the idea of a PDOOM is that AI systems will change humanity in a course of number of years that we're talking about. So what was your PDOOM, the probability that AI systems would change us as humans 2 years ago? And what does that probability look like today? And over what time frame?
Such a spicy question.
Of course, like we gotta end well here in this panel, right? So,
okay.
I will give my answer too, by the way. But go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe let's say like 2 years ago, 20%. Today, 30%.
Wow.
Yeah, not
over the course of how many years, Chris?
2 years. Oh, when did
yes.
we? Oh, 10 years.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
Wow.
You're defining doom as AI changing humans?
Yes, it's not. It doesn't have to be a negative impact per se. It could actually be a positive impact.
2 years ago, it was 100%, and right now it's 100%. Everything we do is informed by AI.
Yeah.
Your Instagram feed. I have been sold so many silly things on Instagram ads. You know what I mean? Like, we're already affecting your product recommendations. Your, Google filling out your emails for you as you're typing. We're already there.
Yeah.
I would say 2 years ago it was maybe 65% born mostly out of ignorance, and now it's 100%.
Yeah.
I think back to the days of when the internet first was born. I am that old, and I think about how unrecognizable everything I do is to those days, and I think the same thing is going to be true 2 years from now.
Wow. Okay. Well, I was, I guess, way more conservative on my thoughts on this. So my PDOOM was asymptotically approaching 0 over the next 50 years, because I really didn't think that AI systems would have that sort of world-changing impact upon us. And my mind has definitely been changed in the last 2 years. I would say it's probably 5% over the next 20 years. So on that note, thank you everyone for this panel. So appreciate it again. So.
Thank you to our panelists Triveni, Chris, George, Chloe, and Dottie.